Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings, and I am joined, as always, with my co-host Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Obviously we record this every other week, and so like in between that news, Massachusetts here, at least where we live, we got some good COVID vaccine news coming April 19th, where everyone's eligible for the vaccine. So that's always good news there. A little bit light ahead of the tunnel.
Yeah, my sister, my twin sister, so she's the same age as me, is actually getting her COVID vaccine. I think as we speak, she's going into Fenway Park
Oh.
this afternoon, and she's eligible because she's a child care worker.
Hmm.
So she gets a little ahead of the line. People like you and I, hardworking journalists, we're last, but that's okay. I've accepted that I'm someone who probably doesn't need the COVID vaccine. I already actually
Yeah.
had COVID in November, but yeah, be very excited to get the vaccine. I hope everyone is excited to get the vaccine. And I thought you were going to talk about the weather because the last week or so we've actually had nice weather here after a terrible winter where it felt like it was cold and 20-mile-per-hour wind gusts every single day. But we're not here to talk about the weather, and we're not here to talk about COVID. What we are here to talk about is women's wrestling. And that was going to kind of be the general theme of today's show, was kind of looking at a broad assessment of women's wrestling just across the wrestling landscape. We're going to talk about WWE, we're going to talk about AEW, we're going to talk about Stardom and kind of the growth of Joshi internationally, which I think is a huge story that is really interesting to follow. And if we have some time left over, we'll talk about maybe some independent wrestling and kind of how that's been impacted in I don't know. I don't want to have the whole intergender wrestling discussion, but to start things off, Jason, I want to talk about a story from this week, this very weekend. It is March 26th is when we're recording this. So on Monday, WWE announced the main events for both nights of WrestleMania, WrestleMania Night 1 and WrestleMania Night 2. And the main events on, I believe it's Night 1 is going to be Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley.
Hmm.
And then Night 2 is going to be Roman Reigns versus Edge. We think reports are saying that Daniel Bryan's going to be in that match. So, but I guess the WWE Championship match and the Universal Championship matches will be main eventing their respective nights. And I think some fans, and actually a lot of fans, if you take Twitter as a barometer of fans, were a little upset about particularly the Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks match not being the main event of WrestleMania. And we saw it trending on social media on Tuesday and Wednesday, kind of in the fallout after that. We saw a lot of the wrestlers in WWE, a lot of the women's wrestlers, advocating for it, tweeting the hashtag, really getting that momentum going. And clearly there's a movement to want to see that match in the main event of WrestleMania. There's a lot of people that feel like that match, I think primarily because it features two African American women, is a historic match that could really, mean a lot to a lot of people if it were to be the main event of WrestleMania. Jason, what was kind of your reaction to the trend? Were you tweeting along with those people? What was your view on kind of how WWE chose its main events and kind of excluding the women from those main events? Do you think what was your kind of reaction to kind of how that unfolded?
I mean, I wasn't tweeting along with it, but I understood where everyone's coming from. Like, I think when Bianca Belair won the Royal Rumble, like I would have been all on board with her and Sasha Banks main eventing because that always seemed like the match right away when Bianca won the Royal Rumble, since that was a story they're building for a month, before then. And then as the months went by, the booking of between Bianca and Sasha, it was pretty mixed. Like I understand they want to make Sasha the heel, and so they want to, sort of go all these different routes with it. But then they added Reginald, the sommelier, and you think Carmella's involved, but Carmella, is not. There's Reginald is just sort of his own independent character, and there's all these mix-ups. They're involved with the tag team titles now for whatever reason, at least they were before, leading up to Fastlane. And so when that hashtag started trending, I was sympathetic to it because I understand why everyone wants it to happen. I mean, look at the past couple WrestleManias, like last year's WrestleMania. Other than cinematic matches, the only regular match that was memorable was Charlotte versus Rhea Ripley. Like I think that
Mm-hmm.
most people came away from the WrestleMania saying that was the best match of the night, like the traditional type of match. And then even the year before, you also obviously had the first ever women's main events with Ronda, Becky, and Charlotte. And so I think people want to ride that momentum even more with the women headlining once again in this WrestleMania. However, I think you're in agreement with me, Jesse. Like the booking with Charlotte and I'm sorry, with Sasha and Bianca hasn't really garnered a main event level status. Could they kill it? Steal the show like Charlotte and Rhea Ripley could steal the show. They certainly could, but as of right now, the way the story has progressed, it hasn't really garnered a main event status. Compared to what they've done with the WWE Championship and the Universal Championship.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in play here. The first thing to me is that the main event of WrestleMania is a marketing tool, and I get wanting to be able to say, look, black women main evented WrestleMania. I get that, but the main event of WrestleMania inherently does not really have greater value than any other match at WrestleMania. We have seen plenty of examples of the past where matches on the undercard end up being much more significant than the main event of WrestleMania. You can look at WrestleMania 13 as a perfect example. They had the I Quit match between Steve Austin and Bret Hart. That's probably the best WWE match in the history of the promotion. And that wasn't the main event. Sid versus The Undertaker was the main event. But people don't remember Sid versus The Undertaker. They remember the match that had a really great angle and was a tremendous match. And everyone remembers it because it was super significant. WrestleMania 18, The Rock and Hulk Hogan. That wasn't the main event. Triple H and Chris Jericho were. But what do people think of when they think of WrestleMania 18? They think of The Rock and Hogan. So with that being said, I think it's important to keep in mind that I think anyone that's upset about the WrestleMania main event should really be upset about just how bad this storyline has been and how they really dropped the ball. I don't think anyone is happy with the way the storyline between Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks has developed since the Royal Rumble. I think you explained that, Jason. There's a lot of concerns about, it's just not as dramatic as it can be. It doesn't feel as realistic as it could be. The Reginald stuff was really unnecessary. The tag team that can't get along is totally overdone in every wrestling promotion, but especially WWE. It's not as good as it should be, and I think that's what people should really be mad about, because I don't think it really makes that big of a difference. I say this as a white guy, it doesn't make that big of a difference to me if the women aren't the main event. I would, if they had a 20-minute great match that had awesome storytelling and a really dramatic conclusion that probably sees Bianca Belair beating Sasha Banks, I think it's a huge success. The fact that it is and is not the main event doesn't really play into that. Obviously, I can see why people want it to be the main event and the kind of status that they think that it might have. But to me, just looking at WrestleMania as a whole, it doesn't really matter to me that if it's the main event or not, as long as it's a really good match with good storytelling. The storytelling has not been good yet. They have a little bit of time to, it could just be one promo exchange changes that. It's possible that happens, but I just don't see the whether it's the main event or the second to main event or the opening match. I don't think that really matters to me.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think it goes back to the Royal Rumble where, when Bianca winning it, it really felt like a big deal. And I think people are expecting her to beat Sasha for the SmackDown Women's title. It just seems like they're doing a crowning achievement moment. That's typically what WrestleMania is for. I mean, they're doing that with Drew McIntyre, most likely, the WWE Championship. And so you expect that for Bianca as well, probably possibly Rhea Ripley in the Raw scene as well. And so I think people just want that big moment for her, and that would be even bigger in the main event. It's just sort of having that crowning achievement just for a new star in WWE. Like we've talked about this before, WWE has struggled to create new stars, and people are seeing this with Bianca. And like you said, they have dropped the ball with Bianca and trying to develop this new star, but they're clearly it's front and center on SmackDown every week that they have a new star in Bianca Belair. And so I think that's just where a lot of people are coming from, where they just want to see a big crowning achievement on the biggest stage and in the main event. That's sort of like the ideal vision people want to see. I think that's the big reason why, a lot of people want this to happen.
Yeah, and I get that. And I think that with the angle that they have, it seems like they have to get Belair. I think people really like Bianca Belair. It would be a great image to see WrestleMania go off the air with Bianca Belair holding the women's title. I think it'd be dumb to not have her win the title just because I don't like the idea of giving someone the biggest push of their life, really building them up, and then having them lose unless you have like a really awesome story to tell after they lose. The way like New Japan had a story with Kenny Omega or Kota Ibushi or Jay White like after the fact, and I just don't think WWE has that for Bianca Belair. Unfortunately, I think you have to make her the champion, and in regards to that, I feel like the way they've handled Bianca Belair is really interesting because when she came up from NXT, I think everyone was like, look, she's going to be a top star. I don't think anyone was denying that. I think that was what the expectations were for her. And then she spent 6 months on the main roster, really not doing a whole lot, not really getting into any programs. She would show up, she might have a match here and there. She had these vignettes that ran, kind of intermittently, but wasn't like she was like in these feuds that were really getting her over. It was more just she was a person on the roster that would have matches on Raw. And it wasn't really until she won the Royal Rumble. She did like a very short, brief feud with Bayley that was like 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the Royal Rumble. That was like the first kind of actual storyline she had. And then she wins the Royal Rumble, and it's like, okay, she's here. She's finally getting a push after kind of not doing much for 6 months. And then since then, she's, because she won the Royal Rumble, she's been on television, and she's been kind of in this feud with Sasha. But I just don't think that they've handled her correctly really outside of the WrestleMania or the Royal Rumble victory. It seems like there was so much more to do with her, and they haven't really been particularly creative in coming up with things for her to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I recall correctly, the first couple months of her debut was just her hanging out with her husband in the Street Profits. Like that was like she was basically their sidekick for the most part. And WWE they don't do like intergender stuff, and so like she never got involved in any of the matches. And
That's not true, Jason. We saw an intergender match at Fastlane. The Alexa Bliss Randy Orton match. Keep going. I want to point that out to make a joke, but no, keep going.
I've already removed that from my head. That's why I had no idea what you're talking about. I already erased that from my memory. But yeah, like Bianca, she was just doing the stuff the Street Profits the whole time, and then like the Street Profits themselves, they had these goofy cinematic matches, and then Bianca would sometimes be involved in that as well. And so like it's nice, probably emotionally for them, for husband and wife to hang out together, work together, but for the fan perspective, she wasn't doing anything for the most part. And so, yeah, you're right. Like they really stumbled for a long time. The vignettes were good because, it just markets her character as the EST. And I think Lance Storm made this point before on a podcast where like that the character could easily be a heel where she can be too much into her own like sort of ego and all that. And I think WWE they did do a good job at transitioning that character to more of a baby face where to like she's not bragging too much about how she's the fastest and strongest. It became more of a relatable type thing, and they really did a good job at doing that. But like you said, it was all more for the build up to the Royal Rumble, showing her parents' reaction to her winning the Rumble. But then after that, yeah, like you said, like the WWE, they want to pair the challenges up to a tag team. They don't get along, and then that builds more conflict. And of course, that turns Sasha heel. But then it's just not compelling storytelling because people like Sasha as well. No one really wants to boo Sasha, even though she can be a good heel. She can be good. She's proven herself to be a good babyface these past couple of months too. And so like it's just a weird dynamic where they just feel the need to shoehorn themselves into a very traditional type of story that doesn't really fit these characters.
Yeah, I think there's a very specific, easy to tell story that they could have done with this feud that they have not done yet. You have Sasha Banks as the established champion, who's kind of dominated SmackDown for the past, 8 months or so. And you have Bianca Belair, who's the young up and comer, who's just an incredible physical athlete. And you just tell the story where Sasha, whose character is that she's the boss, she thinks she's the best and she's out there proving it. You know, she feels threatened by this young up and comer that can do things athletically that she can't do, and you know that no one else on the main roster can really do in the women's division. And you just kind of tell a story where Sasha's a little bit jealous and she gets mad and she's going to try to put Bianca down, and it's competitive, but you don't have to lean so far into the Sasha Banks like just full blown heel. Don't have her cut a promo talking about the fans, you used to cheer for me, now you cheer for her. Like, don't do any of that. And we're taping this before SmackDown tonight, which will probably, I'm sure they're gonna address kind of Sasha's new heel persona, because she basically turned heel at Fastlane. But to me, that's like there's an easy story to tell, and it's not, like you said, doing this kind of very traditional heel babyface dynamic. I think you can just, and they haven't gotten to that, and they should have gone to it by now. We're only a few weeks away from WrestleMania, and I think that's really disappointing. On the flip side, I want to talk about just Raw, which is unfortunate because there's really not that much to talk about the Raw Women's title match, because Asuka has been I forget what's this. Asuka hasn't defended the title on like a pay-per-view since like something like August or something like that.
Yeah.
There's some sort of crazy stat out there. Now, part of that is, you know, I think she was injured for a brief period of time. She was supposed to defend against Lacey Evans. Lacey Evans, you know, had to, you know, drop out because she was pregnant. And so part of that, but also it's just totally unacceptable that they have had nothing for her really to do. She did the tag team match, I think, at one of the pay-per-views. How did she, like, you would never have, unless Brock Lesnar was the champion, you would never have such a long stretch where the men's world title wasn't being defended for that period of time. And I think that kind of gets into, while the, you know, WWE has come a long way in pushing women's wrestling as something that is equally legitimate, and the women could be as big as stars as the men, that's still an obvious inequality that they have, which is just, we don't have anything for Asuka, and she's just gone months and months, you know, and not just Asuka, the women's championship, the most important thing you have for the women to do in your promotion, and it's basically non-existent for the past, you know, 6 months or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the past couple months with Asuka, like, they've been pushing this storyline along with her with this Lacey Evans Charlotte thing, with Ric Flair, you know, and Lacey Evans having this weird, creepy dynamic. And look, we love Ric Flair, but like, this is not the role Ric Flair should be playing in his capacity. He played this manager role, but then like WWE seemed to imply that like he was the father of Lacey Evans' kid for a little bit, and then like it was so strange. And then it just goes into this whole Jerry Springer, you know, type of Maury storytelling, and it's no one cares about that anymore. Like, it's not the Attitude Era anymore.
I guess like the key characters in both the Raw and Women's SmackDown, or the Raw and SmackDown Women's division over the past few months, have been Ric Flair and Reginald. Like, two guys, both of whom have no business being involved. I'm fine with Reginald as like Carmella's manager. Oh, he's like the sommelier. Like, yeah. I will say, Vince McMahon, I guess, hates managers, and he hates the word managers. So they're coming up with like increasingly weird things for managers to be that aren't technically managers. Like, you know, Paul Heyman was originally like Brock Lesnar's agent. Then he was the Advocates, and he's, you know, fulfills a similar role for Roman Reigns. And you have now, like, you got the sommelier. Like, he's just like, why would the wine guy be at ringside? Like, that makes no sense. I'm trying to think. They've used other words. Obviously, they're like using women as a girlfriend, or which is essentially the same managerial role. I'm trying to think what they used. What's Uncle? Why can't I remember Dutch Mantel's name? Uncle Zeb.
Zeb Coulter.
Yeah, there we go. Zeb Coulter, or was it Coulter? Coulter. Anyway, whatever. Yeah. Was he? I'm trying to think if he was called a manager. I don't think he was. Vince hates the word manager, but that's beside the point. On the Raw side, so now, and this is as we kind of ridiculed, you know, the booking of Bianca Belair, kind of over her time on the main roster. You know, her booking has been much, much better than Rhea Ripley, because Rhea Ripley hasn't even been on WWE television. I thought this was something that I don't think enough people were mad about this. Maybe Rhea Ripley doesn't have the correct. She's not as good as stirring up the Twitter mob as some of the other people on the roster. But Rhea Ripley, like I thought she killed it at the Royal Rumble. I thought she was amazing at the Royal Rumble. She was in the last two with Bianca Belair. I believe she had the most eliminations in the match. I was like, Rhea Ripley, after basically a total lost year in NXT, basically was like, I'm like, oh, Rhea Ripley, she killed it. Like, they have to do something with her. And then she was off television for like 2 months, and we got some teasers saying, oh, Rhea Ripley's coming. She's coming to Raw. And she basically walks out, and she's kind of like, feels like she's almost she's going to wrestle Asuka at WrestleMania, and she probably will win the title, fingers crossed this time. But it kind of feels like she's the women's number one contender by default. Because other people they were pushing like Charlotte and Lacey Evans haven't been available. It just, I'm really disappointed in that because I think Rhea Ripley's a super talent that could easily be the top women's performer in the entire company, given everything we've seen from her so far, and she's still so young. I was disappointed that they basically have no creative plans for her after the Royal Rumble. And then she just kind of comes down and is like, I'm going to wrestle you, Asuka, which is great. It's better than her not wrestling at WrestleMania or her wrestling an undercard, non-title match. But how could you not just have her squash people? Like, who cares? Like, or have her beat someone like Dana Brooke that you're not really pushing. I thought it was a total waste of just time to build her up. And now she's coming on. Now she's going to wrestle at WrestleMania, and she feels cold because she hasn't been used on television.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to one of your points you made before, how WWE, they don't know how to book someone after, being built up and then losing in the title match at WrestleMania. So like you mentioned, like New Japan, they book like Kota Ibushi or Kenny Omega. Like Rhea Ripley, when she lost the NXT title to Charlotte, she never got her heat back. And their story was never resolved with Charlotte. It just kind of was like, okay, whatever. That was a thing. I lost the title. Now I'm going to go back and do my thing. And then
Triple H was there telling us they've got a plan.
Yeah, right. They supposedly had a plan. That's what Triple H said on many NXT media calls. Yeah. And obviously we could tell there was no plan. The plan was just a ratings boost. That was basically it.
Which didn't happen, by the way.
Yeah, it didn't happen. And so Rhea Ripley was just in this waiting period because obviously, people in the main office, they like her enough to, push her up into the main roster, which is why, she had that star-making performance in the Royal Rumble. But at the same time, they didn't have a plan for her other than, we just want her to have the championship. And then, they could have done what you said, just have her beat people like Dana Brooke or Mandy Rose. But then at the same time, the whole time on Raw, when Asuka wasn't doing anything, they're just pushing the tag titles the whole time with Shayna Baszler, Nia Jax. Like, they were the main stars of Raw for almost every week. Nia Jax, she went viral herself, the my whole comment, and so that pushed her even more because Vince, that's like the number one thing Vince loves about you. It make those crazy jokes.
It'll keep you on television. Why do you think, R-Truth, that guy's, R-Truth is going to have a job forever because he's really good at that. I think it's clear that Vince thinks Matt Riddle's really funny, which is why we have Matt Riddle the way he is on Raw. Well, it touches on something else, and this is not a problem exclusive to the women's division. It's a problem throughout WWE, and especially on the main roster, is that they oftentimes don't have really concrete plans if you're not in the title picture. If you're Asuka, they don't have concrete plans for you, even if you're the champion. But for a lot of people, it's like, especially in the women's division, if you're not in the title picture, you have nothing really else to do. They don't do a good job pushing any form. Occasionally they do, but they don't do a good job pushing kind of B or C level stories, which are important in both establishing talent and also giving established talent stuff to do outside of contending for the title. I think part of the problem with Charlotte right now, and a lot of people have Charlotte fatigue because she's just been in the title picture all the time. And part of that is because she's never really been in programs that didn't involve the women's championship. It's either she's got the championship or she's chasing after the championship. And you can say that for some of the other women on the roster too. It kind of feels like their shelf life has kind of burned out quicker than normal because there's just not a great variety of depth of talent rotating into the world titles or the title slots. It's just kind of the same names over and over again. To use an example from AEW, People were kind of like, ooh, why was Adam Page? Why is he in this feud with Matt Hardy? It feels like it's a step down for Adam Page, which all of that was true. But the important thing was to give Adam Page something to do that wasn't wrestling Kenny Omega, because I think it's kind of clear that they have that as a long-term idea. And while it wasn't really a super hot feud between Adam Page and Matt Hardy, it gave Adam Page a reason to be on TV each week. It gave him a chance to cut promos, and eventually gave him a feud which he decisively won, and that will keep him relevant and will keep his momentum going when he's not in the main event. And WWE has a problem, I think, doing that. They don't really put together a lot of interesting mid-card feuds. I think the only one that I can think of off the top of my head was the Mandy Rose Sonia Deville feud, which I thought was really good as far as everything that went into that. And they had a decisive match with a real winner and a real loser. And I think it helped Mandy Rose coming out of that. And I think it really helped Sonya Deville. And they haven't done anything else with that. I mean, Sonya Deville coming, right after that, had to take some time off to deal with the stalker incident, of course. And obviously that's nothing you can really do about that. And, tremendous respect for her for doing that. But Mandy Rose hasn't done really anything since that feud. But I just think in general it's hard to give these people something to do. Like I said, have Rhea Ripley, have Dana Brooke come out, just say like, Rhea Ripley, you think you're, hot stuff. I'm gonna kick your ass tonight. Like, do a match, maybe have it end in DQ, do a second match and have Rhea Ripley win decisively. Like, just do that on Raw on back-to-back weeks. It will keep Rhea Ripley on TV and keep her momentum going. And it seems easy to do, yet it continues to elude WWE. And I think part of that is just not being able to book a lot of things in advance.
And part of that is that, the irony of having tag team titles is that they keep breaking up established tag teams. Like the Iconics, they broke up, and yet both of them are still doing nothing. Like they had no story for them after their breakup. There was no reason for them to break up, any storyline reason. They just did it for no reason. And obviously Peyton Royce and Billie Kay, I'm sure they would love to be back together again, because right now, like Billie Kay, she has, it's a fun story, but still, it's a very much a lower mid-card story of her trying to give everyone her resume and all that. Peyton Royce, she had a decent match on Raw, but other than that, like, there's no future direction for her. She lost the match definitively, and so there's nothing else much for Peyton Royce. And yeah, she can obviously cut a good promo on Raw Talk, but that's on Raw Talk. Like, that's not even canon for the most part in WWE.
And never acknowledged. Like, God forbid they show the Raw Talk promo. I don't know, maybe they did. I didn't watch Raw last week, but did they even show like an inset promo? Like, here, Peyton Royce with some strong words on Raw Talk, and just like cut like a 30-second piece of that? Or no, it's just she's out and she's wrestling Asuka.
Yeah. I didn't watch Raw either, so I don't know if they actually inserted that promo.
I don't think they did. If I'm wrong, someone please feel free to yell at me, because I'm wrong about that. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a challenge. And it's a challenge on the men's side too. Look, part of the argument for Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks main eventing WrestleMania is that Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley doesn't really feel like a hot match right now. And a lot of that is kind of this, it's because their creative isn't that great either. And they haven't really put a lot of effort into that direction. I think, obviously WWE is going to treat the men's world title bigger than the women's world title, unless there's really extenuating circumstances. Like they wanted to make history at WrestleMania 2 years ago, and they had Ronda Rousey, who had, mainstream appeal that no one else in the company really had. But it's a challenge for everyone on the roster. And unfortunately, with a sign of, I don't want to say it's a sign of equality of the women, but it's a part of just being an asset to WWE, is that sometimes you get crappy creative, and sometimes you don't get pushed, and sometimes you don't know what your character is going to do. And you talk about they broke up the Iconics to do basically nothing with them individually. They broke up Tucker and Otis to do nothing. I don't even think they didn't even have like a blow off match. They just gone. And then what are those guys doing now? Nothing. so it's part of the game in WWE. I want to switch gears and to switch over to AEW. AEW's women's division obviously been the topic of discussion. I think I can say easily that it was definitely a weakness of the promotion for a long time. But I think it's also fair to say that over the last month or so, maybe a little bit further back, there's clearly been more effort and development that has gone into the women's division in AEW. And last week's Dynamite closing the show with that Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa match. I mean, that was a huge, huge success for AEW, for the individual performers, for the women's division as a whole, being able to put on that match. I guess. What did you think? What did you think about the lights out match 2 weeks ago?
Oh, that was phenomenal. Like it was part of, like we mentioned before, it was a story that was being built up over the course of months. It generated it justified a main event. I know AEW likes to have the lights out matches as main events, but even if it wasn't a lights out match, like you can make an argument that it could have been a main event for a Dynamite because of how hot the feud was.
Mm-hmm.
These two, Britt Baker, Thunder Rosa, are going at it for months. They're telling a very simple story. Britt Baker, she's trying to say that, oh, you don't belong here, Thunder Rosa. You're not signed here of AEW, but people like Thunder Rosa, and like that. So that's why Britt Baker's the heel. Like, she's wrong in that aspect. Thunder Rosa does belong here. She's had killer matches on AEW. She's very much on Twitter. She's a champion for women's wrestling all over. So she's a very good baby face to put your back into. And so it's a very, very great match. I know a lot of people aren't into the hardcore matches, but still, I thought it was a very good hardcore match. Very much the best women's match they've ever put on in AEW by far. I don't think it's even close. And like you said before, it just has to do with the effort that they're putting in. Before they weren't even showing effort. It didn't look like, at least, we understood it took time. These things take time for it to happen. All these months of storytelling, but still, you have to make an effort to do this, and they're clearly putting effort with these characters.
Yeah, I think two things stood out about it. That match in particular. The first was AEW has, and I wrote about this on Voice of Wrestling. AEW has always been chasing WWE. WWE has really set a standard for women's wrestling over the last few years, and that standard is really high compared to the rest of American wrestling. If you want to compare, Impact has done a pretty good job. So I'll exclude them. But if you look at the efforts ROH has had, or AEW has had, or independents have had, it's really hard to match the kind of investment and quality that WWE has amassed, because they have incredible depth of talent, and they've done a legitimately very good job at changing the way people feel about women's wrestling in this country. AEW was going to be a real uphill battle because they weren't going to have the same kind of talent available, and they were in a very they're in a very competitive environment trying to establish the company, and it's hard to establish that with people who might not be ready for long TV matches. Thunder Rosa said it on her AEW Unrestricted podcast, where they were kind of talking about women getting more time on TV, and she said, "Look, it's really hard, and it's not beneficial to put women who aren't ready for long TV matches in long TV matches. It establishes a negative stereotype about that person." But for the first time, by having this kind of match, I thought AEW kind of reshaped how women's wrestling can put their own stamp on women's wrestling. And by that, I mean, this was not from a pure technical quality standpoint. It wasn't the best women's wrestling match you'll see on American television. I think there have been WWE matches that were technically better than this match, but by having a match that was so violent with the level of blood and the use of weapons, and just seeing women do that, it's totally different than anything WWE would do. WWE is never going to have that kind of level of violence, not even in their men's matches anymore, and not in the women's matches either. AEW said, look, we're going to put on something that WWE can't do, which is something they haven't been able to do in regards to their women's division, just because I don't think they've had, they haven't dedicated the time to do that, and they didn't have the the talent to feel like they could pull it off. And 2 weeks ago they did, and I thought that was huge. And then the second thing that I found very refreshing as a fan, which was that the way this match was promoted and marketed and talked about it wasn't patronizing at all. It wasn't WWE really goes all out on letting you know that it's really important that women are doing this, that, we're going to have women are going to have the first ever women's Hell in a Cell match, first ever women's main event at WrestleMania, first ever women's this, first ever women's that. And it's nice that those benchmarks are finally being hit. But I do think when you promote stuff like that, it does. Like WWE, when they started pushing the women's revolution, they're like, we're changing the game in women's sports, and it's like, okay, we're like 40 years after Title IX, 40 years after Billie Jean King, 20 years after Serena and Venus Williams, or even going back Martina Navratilova, and that kind of like women's sports have been established before the WWE, Stephanie McMahon come out and cut a promo. But on the AEW end, they basically just said, they hyped it up as the first lights out match on Dynamite, not the first women's main event on Dynamite. And like you said, Jason, it wasn't like they just wanted to have a lights out match for women because it was a novelty of it. Look, they had built this feud. It had been a long simmering feud, and it was a logical step for them to have kind of a weapons heavy gimmick match as the blow off for the feud. It made logical sense in the storyline. And it just so happened that feud happened to feature women, because women can have intense feuds that end like this. And it's not something that's only reserved for male wrestlers. And I just felt that was very refreshing as a fan, that I wasn't being lectured about what a historic moment this is for the company, that this is what's happening, and it's happening organically. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think just two things on that point. Like, one, for AEW, there's more showing, not telling. If you see anyone seen the videos after the match, like all the emotions that Thunder Rosa expressed, the standing ovation she got, that's everyone congratulating them. I think they really showed that, this is a big deal, rather than telling you it's a big deal. So that's one aspect of it. And two, for WWE, we're promoting that. The ironic part is that, it's like, WWE's changing the game for women's wrestling. Well, it's by your fault and by your design that
exactly.
Wrestling is so down below. And so I think that's why people don't buy it as much, because it's like, we're doing the women's revolution. It's like, why didn't you do it before? Early 2000s in the Attitude Era. It's like, it just seems like placing on the blame on the fans that, it's your fault that women's wrestling is looked down upon. It's like, well, no, it's because you didn't take it seriously. And so the fans are going to take it seriously also. And so I think that's another reason why people don't like to be lectured by WWE by that kind of thing. And for AEW, they just did more showing, not telling, because obviously everyone showed that this is a big deal for the women, but they obviously, like you said, they didn't market it that way or promote it that way.
Yeah, and like I said, when you promote it, this is our first women's blank, it's going to lead to the question of, okay, well, why did it take this long? If they were to go this is the first women's main event in AEW Dynamite history, I'm like, well, it's really not a great thing that it took 77 episodes of Dynamite for women to finally close the show for once. That's not really something you really want. To me, that's not something I want to bring attention to. That's like, hey, look, our women haven't been able to main event forever, and now they are. I think it kind of can backfire in that scenario. I recommend anyone who hasn't seen the post-match video they released on social media, and they did show the Thunder Rosa promo that she cut right after the match on Dynamite this week, which I thought was smart. But the post-match video is awesome. I thought Britt Baker laying on the trainer's table, getting thumbtacks pulled out and saying into the camera, I hope Dave Meltzer gives me 5 stars for this, was hilarious. And look, I think if you look at AEW's women's roster, I think you can see pieces coming together that weren't there 6 months ago. Obviously, you got Baker back, and look, Britt Baker's a much different performer than when she first came. When AEW signed Britt Baker, she was someone that didn't have a lot of experience, but had a lot of potential and was a fantastic human interest story. And since then, she's developed a ton, both as an in-ring performer and as a talker. I mean, she's probably right now. Do you think there's a better women's promo in wrestling than Britt Baker?
No, I mean, she knows her character so well. She knows everything about her. I mean, that promo from this week's Dynamite was so great. Just reestablish herself as a heel. It was, she's on fire right now on the mic, and that's, she's definitely, with her injury back then before, she really had to develop, the skills, because that's the only way she could get herself over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sasha Banks and Bayley are really good too. So I don't want to say I'm not disparaging them, but I just think she's fantastic. Her promo on Dynamite was awesome this week, and she's gonna be I think she's going to be the big star that that division is going to be built around. I think right now, obviously Hikaru Shida's held the title for a long time, but I think her time as champion is probably going to come to an end pretty soon. And I just think that Baker seems like I don't think Baker's going to beat her for the title, even though it makes sense. I could actually see Thunder Rosa, given that she won the match, beating Hikaru Shida for the title, and then setting up a Thunder Rosa versus Brett Baker feud over the women's title. But and then you also see other stuff. I mean, I think obviously the Shaq match, which Shaq and Jade Cargill versus Red Velvet and Cody Rhodes, I think that was a big success for the women who were involved. Obviously, Jade Cargill is someone that AEW is really high on for pushing, and I think it's really, really obvious why anyone would be high on pushing her. She's got an unbelievable look. She's the closest. Jade Cargill is the closest person I have ever seen in real life that looks like an actual comic book character. Like she looks like Wonder Woman or Power Girl or the way, like, obviously comic books, they're just drawn like so cartoonishly muscular and physical, and like Jade Cargill's like the closest person I've ever seen that looks actually like that. She's clearly an eye-turning person, the person that if you're going to flip channels, you're going to stop and look at her. And obviously a tremendous, athlete. And there's a lot of, positivity coming from her end. I thought Red Velvet did great on holding up her end of that match. I thought she really came off super well, getting put in that spotlight, which was just a huge acceleration from where she was, she was basically, working on an AEW Dark and occasionally would do some Dynamite stuff, but went from that to working this huge match and nailed it. You got other stuff. You got Riho's back. You've got Chris Statlander, who I think also is one of those people that has a ton of potential in the women's division. Obviously, hopefully she's able to come back relatively soon. She was injured a long time ago. Just in general, what do you see as like the AEW women's division? What would you like to see out of it going forward? Whether it's individual names getting bigger pushes or just different, booking stuff going on.
Yeah, I think just overall, I think I just would like to see more consistency with the booking. Like, like the women's tag team tournament. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers that happening, but people in it. But Diamante and Ivelisse won that tournament, and they have not gotten a significant push after that. People assume like, oh, are they gonna be women's tag titles, or or I guess not. Unless they make it an annual thing, that could be an interesting idea. So have Ivelisse and Diamante, whoever wins this new cup, tag tournament cup, they'll face them. But again, just more consistent pushes for the women that actually, win these big things. Like Ryo Mizunami, she won the title eliminator tournament. Are we going to see more of her in the future? Obviously, AEW Dark, like Red Velvet has shown that like she has put in the work over there, and so I'm curious to see the other women that like they have in AEW Dark. Are they just going to be regular enhancement talents? They have like a couple women that like are just sort of mainstays in there, like Kylan King, Danny Jordan, all those other women that like just mainstay enhancement talents. Like how are they going to be used in the future? Do they see star potential in them? Like a Red Velvet who just sort of came out of nowhere. No one really expected her to come up and be part of a Shaq match. So are they going to do something similar, just start shotgun someone else up into a prominent role in the future? So I'm very curious to see all of that. But yeah, just consistency is really what I'm hoping for the women's division. Just making sure that the people you want to push, they're staying strong, and then if you're giving someone a big spotlight, they continue to get that big spotlight. Like Vicky Guerrero, she is still managing Nyla Rose, but still we don't get a Vicky promo every week or every couple weeks. It's been a while on Dynamite at least that we got Vicky Guerrero promo promoting Nyla Rose. I think Double or Nothing is like the last one that's memorable. Like she's got a promo on Dark, but like not everyone watches Dark.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things going on because they only have 4 starters. They only have 2 hours a week. Yeah. They've got just a ridiculously large roster at this point. That you can obviously make the case that they need to commit more time to women on Dynamite, and maybe not even time, but just give more variety, giving some of these mid-card and undercard people stuff to do. I think it's similar to the WWE issue we were talking about earlier, that if It's not the women's title. What's going on now? Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa is a good example of something that was not for the women's championship, but overall, I think it can be certainly challenging. And look, they had a really difficult time, last summer when that women's tag team tournament was happening because first of all, you had the pandemic, which shut down international travel, which made it really difficult. They were leaning on, Joshi talent coming in. They had some talents in Europe that couldn't get into the company. Look, this is a different division if, Riho was there the entire time, or if Bea Priestley was there more often. People who were, on the show. What's her name? I can't remember her name now. Bea Priestley's tag team partner, Havoc? No, not just.
Jamie Hayter.
Hey, Jamie Hayter, not Havoc. Yeah, Jamie Hayter. Look, the people that, they were counting on to come in, internationally, they weren't going to be able to come to U.S. With any frequency, so that hurt them. You had Baker and Statlander, who were two people they were obviously very high on, missed time with injury. It was really tough, and part of that is that you had to bring in people like Ivelisse and Diamante because you need just people to work and you need people to have these matches. But at the same time, when Britt Baker comes back and you get Riho back and you have some other people you push, you're not always going to have time to get back to those people who you were pushing 3 or 4 months ago without, more dedicated television time. I think that part of, the women's tag team tournament or the women's eliminator tournament, a lot of that stuff taking place not on Dynamite was to give more time for these individual talents to get out there and have matches. And they might not always have 18 minutes, with commercials and everything, to let on Dynamite to let two people who aren't in the title picture to have that kind of a match. It's just not how AEW is going to book. So I think, there's a lot of ways I think you can improve the use of the women. One of the things that I found interesting was what we've seen out of Tay Conti, who was someone who, she washes out of WWE. They release her, and I heard people saying oh, sign Tay Conti, say Tay Conti. And I'll be honest, I was kind of personally why? She's just this person that WWE hired, never did anything with her, has no real wrestling experience outside of the few years in WWE. Why would you want to? I didn't see her as this big get for them, but they signed her. And she's improved a ton since they signed her. And she had a match on Dynamite with Nyla Rose that was pretty damn good. And, with Tay Conti, it's all going to be about how she improves in the ring because I think obviously she's got a great look. She's got a great athletic background. She's got a type of charisma that you would want to have in a talent. It just, getting it in the ring was going to be the last step. And she looks great now. And I'm like, wow, that was a great move, signing Tay Conti. And I was wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Tay Conti is, I think she should be a future template for AEW signing, especially when you sign former WWE talent. It's great to sign your Christian Cages, your Paul Whites, and all that, but still, you don't want to be the former WWE people, the promotion that signs former WWE people. I know they're using them well, the way they use Sting and all that, they use Jake Roberts. They've used them well, but I think signing people like Tay Conti, it really showcases your development system. Because I know Dustin Rhodes, he does a lot of training with the women, and this really puts over Dustin Rhodes as a trainer. He's killing. Obviously, there's other people behind the scenes, your Jerry Lynn's, QT Marshalls, and all that. And it really promotes them. Hey, people behind the scenes at AEW, they're doing a good job at developing these wrestlers. Tay Conti, like you said, she had this big moment at in one of the Battle Royals at WrestleMania, but NXT, she did nothing at all, and she was mostly just an enhancement talent, and you didn't really think anything of her, but clearly she has a lot of talents that, people behind the scenes at AEW, they're really helping her out to really showcase her judo background, her big martial arts background as well, to really showcase her skills and really put her over.
Yeah, I mean, it's also as much as a feather in the cap it is for the Nightmare Factory and Dustin and QT. We can't discredit QT here. He's a very important man. But Tay Conti is a good example of someone that's okay, what is actually going on in this WWE Performance Center? Because they signed so many people, and you have someone like Tay Conti who's there for years. Doesn't really show any signs of obvious improvement, then works with Dustin Runnels and all of a sudden she's a lot better. Now maybe she was always good. She just wasn't used that well on NXT television. And it's not like we saw her having, a bunch of 10 or 15-minute matches on NXT television all the time. So, she could have always been better, but it just seemed like you can look at the track record of the Performance Center when it comes to producing talent from the ground up is probably not what you would expect it to be given the investments in the Performance Center. And you're right. I think that is it's interesting person for WWE to grab. I think, or for AEW to grab. I think we've seen it with a few other people. Like I think Cesar Bonani. I think he was a WWE Performance Center guy.
Yeah.
And you could tell why he was signed immediately by WWE and then never used because of his size and his physique. And there's other people that have popped up on our. I think Ryan Nemeth is another former WWE developmental guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there's anyone else off the top of my head.
Nick Comoroto.
Yeah, he was another guy, and that was funny because he just showed up on Dynamite like totally unannounced. Like he was just John Moxley was wrestling this random person, and he just started. I was like, I think I like turned on the Celtics game during during a commercial break, and I came back and I'm like, who is this huge guy beating the crap out of John Moxley? But yeah, he was another guy. And maybe those people will turn into something, and maybe they won't. But it is interesting to see that they are targeting some people who kind of wash out of WWE's Performance Center on the end, and that might be a good source of women because it's hard. There's not the same kind of depth there's less women in wrestling, especially in the United States. There's less women that have a lot of experience in wrestling in the United States that are available to get. You don't have. I always say this when people talk about AEW's women's division, like there wasn't the women's version of Chris Jericho out there for them to get and kind of use as their first, superstar champion. There wasn't a woman's Kenny Omega. There wasn't a woman's Young Bucks. They had to start really from the ground up, either by introducing talent to the United States or by finding talent from the independents or developing talent in-house. Jade Cargill and Red Velvet are both, QT Marshall students. They're people that were trained, Red Velvet obviously predates her. I think her wrestling career predates AEW by a few years, but, was trained by QT and really was just kind of a Georgia indie wrestler for a few years before finding her way into AEW. Anna Jay is someone like when they put Anna Jay on Dynamite, I think she only had like 6 matches in her entire life. And obviously there's, something there with her. So there's a lot going on with how they develop talent. Got some time left. I wanted to talk about Stardom. Now, Jason, you follow Stardom closer than I do. I'm very much a casual Stardom fan, and just Joshi in general. I think this is more niche than maybe WWE or AEW talk. But one of the things that I've noticed a lot in the past year or so is really an increase in interest in Joshi wrestling outside of Japan. I was looking at the Voices of Wrestling top 100 matches of the year list from 2020, and that's hundreds of people give their top 10 matches of the year, and they all get calculated into a list, and it's a great way to find matches that you might not have heard about or thought or had missed from last year to go see. But I just having read that list year after year, in 2020, I saw a lot of Joshi matches, a lot from different promotions. It wasn't just Stardom, which I think was the most frequent one, but there was, stuff from Tokyo Joshi Pro. There was stuff from, I think it's Pro Wrestling Wave?
Yes.
Ice Ribbon, these different kind of smaller Joshi promotions. And it's clearly something that's growing in the United States and abroad outside of just Japan. Obviously I think Joshi actually historically is like not as popular in Japan as it once was. It used to be much more mainstream in Japan than it is now, but in the United States it's super popular. As someone that kind of follows it closer than I do, what's kind of your thoughts on kind of the explosion of Joshi popularity over the past year or so?
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting to look at because Stardom World, their subscribers have gone up exponentially during the pandemic, and obviously that's probably just because pandemic, people just need things to watch, and people just watch Joshi, and obviously AEW putting a spotlight on Joshi wrestling, introducing people to Veni, Rin Kadokura and all these other talents that Joshi fans know of, but obviously not a lot of other mainstream just people who watch AEW, WWE, they don't know about them. And it's really cool to give them a spotlight. And of course, with Stardom and their growth, it's just been a slow moving thing for these past couple of years, because WWE, they sort of purged their top two talents of Kairi Sane and Io Shirai. Those are their two top stars, and they get purged by WWE. Toni Storm was a big star in Stardom, and then WWE signs her, and so obviously Mayu Utani, they're left as the main star, and then they have to push these younger talents like their main champion right now, Utami. She's 22. Some other champions, they're very much in their 20s, like 25, their last high speed champion, Azumi, she just graduated high school. That's how young we're talking these wrestlers are. And so it's interesting to see them develop. The work rate has gone better, and that's more appealing to a lot of the hardcore wrestling fans. It's a style that everyone can get into and really enjoy. The big Budokan show that was, did good numbers from what I understand. And, everyone praised all the matches because, they are working a style that is appealing to a lot of fans, especially fans who watch New Japan, especially.
Yeah, like I said, I'm very much a casual Stardom fan, but I watched the Budokan show just because, it got a lot of publicity. And that's kind of how I watch. I have some wrestling promotions WWE, AEW, New Japan, that I just kind of watch constantly. And then a lot of the other promotions I will watch when I hear buzz about something. I'll watch Noah shows when I hear, the main event was really good. Or I'll watch Ring of Honor. I try to watch all the Ring of Honor pay-per-views. I'll watch the one tonight. But I'm not watching religiously. And Stardom's one of those promotions. And I heard a bunch of good stuff about the Budokan show. And, it's good that they ran Budokan. Part of the reason they ran Budokan was because everyone can basically run Budokan because it's really cheap and it's a way to get in fans. But they drew a good crowd. I believe the Stardom show actually outdrew the New Japan show that ran a week later. That was the 49th anniversary show, which is obviously a really big deal. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons for that. It was the biggest show Stardom had produced in really a long time versus this show that New Japan had put together at the last minute with a main event with El Desperado challenging for Kota Ibushi. But was still, that's a big accomplishment. And so I watched the Budokan show and I'm like, look, the matches are athletic. The matches are really easy to watch because they're only about, I would say a lot of them are 10 minutes or 15, between 10 and 15 minutes. So they're easy to watch. You're not having to make this 30-minute, investment in each match. The wrestlers are really easy to it's really easy to understand what each wrestler is because they have, whether even it's something just their outfits helps you tell a story about what kind of, is this person going to be heel or this person's going to be kind of a baby face. How often do they have English commentary? Never, right?
Never, which is why it's interesting why there's a big international explosion, because Stardom is not very friendly towards their English audience. They do have English subtitles for promos, but they don't offer English commentary.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting thing. So something like you said, so Stardom, I think their subscriber base was really big. It grew a ton over the last year, which was really impressive because they were running empty arena shows. I think Stardom was the first empty arena show that outside of WWE that I really watched. They had a show called No People Here Gate, which I thought was a hilarious title. And that was kind of and that was before, I think, WWE and AEW must have been running empty arena shows at that time, but maybe not. But they ran a No People Here Gate. And I was I had to watch it because it was the first empty arena show that I was how are they going to produce this? And they, they had some of the wrestlers at ringside making noise, and they had photographers, and it was interesting to watch that. But you're right. It was interesting about their growth, right? So we just came off a year where the empty arena shows or, clap crowds or you don't have crowds at all. Basically, no wrestling promotion saw growth except for Stardom. Stardom, had their, attendant their their attendance didn't go up, obviously. That would be kind of impossible. But they had a big jump in Stardom World subscribers. And the really interesting thing was that, is it Rosie or Rossi Ogawa?
Rossi.
Yeah, so Rossi Ogawa said, I'm reading it here, that this is on March 1st, he said that 70% of Stardom World subscribers are international, which means they're not from Japan. They're from the US, the UK, Europe, Canada, Asia, Africa, other places that aren't Japan. And that's like really surprising to me because I do know that streaming services aren't ubiquitous in Japan the way they are in the United States. And that's why like a bigger chunk can come from outside of Japan. But it just shows that people are really passionate about watching this kind of wrestling. And it's the only one of the only brands of wrestling that is really growing outside of, from the past year. And I find that to be really interesting. What do you think it is, Jason, that is made people jump on the Joshi bandwagon? I have some of my ideas of my own, but I'm interested to know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a multitude of things. That's not really just one thing, right? You can't just say, oh, this one wrestler is like the big draw. Like I think it's just combination. Maybe you say a faction, maybe like Don Del Mundo has gained a lot of popularity over this past year, with Julia leading that charge. But obviously, everyone else is big fans of everyone else in Don Del Mundo. And Mayu Iwatani, she's always a constant. And even speaking of Julia, her big feud with Tam Nakano in the main event of Budokan, that was a big thing over the past year with Tam building her story. And yeah, I mean, there's just a multitude of things that I can't really just say one thing. I'm curious what your ideas are of this growth that Stardom has.
Well, I actually think WWE has played a big role in this for a couple of reasons. And the first being that WWE, signed Stardom top talents and, has pushed them. And it's not just, and not just obviously, Asuka wasn't a Stardom talent, but was a Joshi performer in other promotions.
Mm-hmm.
They get her. She's great. They push her, as a top star. Other people like Io Shirai and Kairi Sane, similar kind of vein they did come from Stardom. And, I think people see that and they're like, wow, these women are really good, from Japan. I wonder what's happening there. Let me Google Japanese women's wrestling. And then you have Stardom. They might not even know about Stardom before they start looking for it. I think that helps. And even like we said, WWE, legitimizing women's wrestling to their fan base, because obviously Joshi wrestling has been legitimized, dating back to like the 50s. But WWE teaching fans that look, women's wrestling is a serious business and these women can have great matches, I think gets people more invested in watching women's wrestling outside of WWE, and which has also led to an increase in interest in a promotion like Stardom, because most people get, I definitely am this way. I'm pretty sure you are too. Like, we got into wrestling through WWE. So,
Mm-hmm.
and if WWE wasn't around, would I have watched New Japan Pro Wrestling? Would I have watched Impact? Would I have watched Ring of Honor? Would I be watching AEW? I don't know, because WWE was, what introduced me as a child to wrestling. And I think if, they introduce, they can educate their fan base about women's wrestling, there's going to be there's going to be a bigger fan base for non-WWE women's wrestling and the interest in seeing what's happening. And, another thing is, New Japan also, kind of doing the same thing, but, replace women's wrestling with Japanese pro wrestling. People in America are much more interested in Japanese pro wrestling than they ever have been. And I think that trickles down to, maybe it's not Stardom directly, but it does trickle down to an increase in women's wrestling in Japan, interest in people being more open-minded about, I'm going to watch some Japanese pro wrestling. And, maybe it's not, I watched New Japan first before I watched All Japan, before I watched Noah. And now I do pay attention to those promotions. And if it wasn't because I was interested in New Japan to start, I probably wouldn't just be like, if I never had watched Japanese wrestling before, I'm not turning on, a Suwama match for, in All Japan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even like AEW, like you said before, they've introduced Joshi talent, for AEW fans who are fans of Riho, they can see her on Stardom when she was working there. Hikaru Shida, of course, has been the champion for like over a year now, or like close to it. I don't know what the exact dates are, but she's been champion for a very long time, and so you could go back and watch her work in Japan. And like Emi Sakura, you can see what her promotion got to move. If you're a big fan of their sort of weird empty arena setup, you can watch those. I know like they have a very dedicated fan base. I'm personally not a fan of it, but those fans are very loyal to that promotion. And so, yeah, it's just a mix around of people watching different promotions from all different types of whether it's Ice Ribbon, Kato Move, Marvelous, Ice Ribbon, or even Stardom itself.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that AEW is also playing a role in that. And look, the women's Eliminator tournament might have been the first time that some people watched Japanese women's pro wrestling that was in Japan. They had the matches in Japan. They had, Excalibur and Taz were there doing the commentary, which gave it English commentary. But they were, that might have been the first time people saw wrestling in Japan. It's like, wonder what this is. And look, we in regards to Stardom, was purchased by Bushiroad, the same company that owns New Japan Pro Wrestling, and obviously that has probably benefited Stardom having a large company that is familiar with pro wrestling backing them. That's huge. That's been huge for them. But more money doesn't always equal more popularity, and there hasn't really been a big. I know this is a whole other story, but there hasn't really been a big crossover between New Japan and Stardom. You don't see like Tanahashi working this tag team match with Jungle Kiona or something like that. That hasn't happened. There's a million reasons why that hasn't taken place, but it does kind of introduce. They had the matches at the Tokyo Dome. The dark matches on Wrestle Kingdom featuring the women, which they unfortunately legally cannot show on New Japan World. Because I believe it's because New Japan World is partially owned by the TV network in Japan that runs New Japan that I can't remember off the top of my head right now. It's going to drive me crazy.
I think they're owned by TV Asahi, and Stardom is I think there might be Fuji TV. I think Stardom is broadcasted on.
Fuji TV was the old that was like network television that used to broadcast like All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling back in like the 70s, 80s, 90s. I don't know. Yeah, but anyway, but Japanese cable television alliances beside. There's a reason they can't show the Stardom matches on New Japan World, but that definitely does help. But you touched on interesting. It's kind of a weird time for Stardom to be experiencing growth, not only due to the pandemic, but also due to just it's not like they have like this like golden age of established talent. They've really been pushing new talent over the past few years. They lost Yoshirai, who was really like the ace of the promotion. They lost Kairi Sane, who I'm not really familiar with her time at Stardom. I'm assuming she was a relatively big star in the promotion, if not.
She is basically like the second ace of the promotion.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. If Yoshirai is Tanahashi, she is Nakamura. And I believe they lost those two stars right off. Toni Storm, who was a younger up and coming star who they invested in, she goes. Hana Kimura, who they've been investing in a lot, unfortunately her story, which is horribly tragic, that was, they lose her. That hurts a ton. And I'm trying to think. I believe there was I think there was a couple retirements too.
Yeah, they had two wrestlers that retired. Hazuki, she retired pretty young. And then Kagetsu retired. She's like a big veteran as well. She's one of like the Might Iwatani level stars. I liked her. I think I watched her retirement match, like not knowing it was her retirement match. I'm like, this woman's like pretty good. Like I'm and then I found like, it's her retirement match. She's never wrestling again. And that's Joshi has really short careers. People retire really young. They start young, they retire young. Not all of them, as Aja Kong is telling us. But it can be, it's kind of a weird time to experience that kind of growth because, like, Julia, they really experimented with pushing her as like she was this person that they kind of brought into the promotion, immediately gave her a big push. People were like, I don't know if we're gonna, I don't think this is a great idea. And she's really grown into that role. It's kind of like a very Okada-like situation, right? Okada basically gets this push kind of out of nowhere in New Japan, where Gato is basically like, look, Okada is going to be our new superstar, and everyone's like, this guy, the guy, who was a young boy and then did nothing in TNA, and then obviously that worked out fabulously for them, and it feels like Julia's kind of on that same track. Yeah, I mean, like even Ice Ribbon, like she never stood out as like, oh, like she's a can't miss prospect. It's like,
it was kind of random that she was chosen and she was given like this huge spot to shine in, but she's killed it.
Yeah, I mean, they will also have like a bunch of other talents. Yeah, like right now, like I said before, Utami, she's the world of Star champion. You know, she's very young, and like she's not even like the leader of her faction, Queen's Quest. That's another person, Momo Watanabe. But like they're giving like this other person a push, and she was like a big rookie from like, 2 or 3 years ago, and now all of a sudden now like she's the champion, and so like they're really accelerating all these people's pushes.
Yeah, Utami got like the I remember when they were pushing Utami, she got like the giant 1995 WCW push where she was just a rookie and she's like immediately won every title almost.
Yeah.
And there was some I remember seeing there was like some pushback on that. Like, why is this person being, and I think most people accepted that she was good, but some people were like, I don't like this person just, immediately winning the titles. What does that mean for the titles? Why don't they have to pay their dues? Blah blah blah. But in a promotion like Stardom that's seen that kind of attrition of their roster, and I've been purged by WWE, and early retirements and all of that, like you have to be aggressive when it comes to creating new stars. You can't like, okay, you're going to spend 3 years as a young lion, or you're going to spend 3 years on the undercard doing nothing, and then we'll move you to the mid card, and then maybe in like year 10, 11 you can finally crack the main event, which is kind of common in other promotions. You do have to kind of be quick on your feet, and you got to be open to pushing people who are, I think with Momo, I'm pretty sure it was like, I think she graduated high school and then like wrestled some like crazy main event match like on the same day.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I remember hearing that story too, and it's just, and there's a lot of people like that. You mentioned I saw them on the Budokan show, but the opening match, the high speed title, it was Natsupoi and I think AZM. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Is it pronounced AZM?
It's Azumi.
Azumi. I'm seeing on Cage Match, she's AZM, but also known as Azumi. But anyway, I was like watching that match, and I was like, this is great. Like, this is really, both women were really athletic. They were wrestling at a high speed. It was like I was watching, I think I just used high speed when that was the name of the title, so that makes sense. But it was like I was watching a Dragon Gate match, and Azumi here is only 18 years old.
Yeah.
And look, I think that also helps. Let's do another thing here. Sorry. I think that also helps, when you push young people, you're going to get maybe a younger audience. I think I would like to see a wrestling environment that pushed like people who were like 18, 19, 20, 21 on television, because I think that could bring in a whole new audience. People like to see, in entertainment, younger people like to see young people in big roles. That's why, someone like, to use an entertainment example, someone like Billie Eilish is a really big star. Part of it, the gimmick is that she was like 17 or 18 years old, and young kids are going to gravitate towards that. I think it's cool that like Dante Martin was 19 when he was signed to AEW. Like, yeah, push those people. Like, let's go. I want to see people who are from the next generation getting a push right away. And sometimes I think it's hard to do that, especially in, whether even in New Japan or in WWE, when you have such an established hierarchy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like it's kind of weird to think about. Like, Mai Watani, she's like 28 years old, and yeah, she's like the old generation of stars. Even though like that's still pretty young. She's still in the prime of her career. But obviously, yeah, they want to just push all these younger talents that they have now with Julia Utami and even like Natsupoi, winning the high speed title. Even the tag champions like Himeka and Micah, like they're both in their early 20s as well, and so like it's just crazy, this youth movement. And yeah, you're right, like do one of them stand out as this big level like main event star? No, but it's just like you said, it's just the youth movement that people are enjoying. People just enjoy this new generation of talent getting the pushes because they watch other promotions where the younger talent are kind of just buried for the most part, other than like AEW, like pushing Dante Martin. But still, I don't think Dante Martin and Top Flight, I don't think they're in line for a tag title shot anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I just appreciate the novelty of seeing that. Like, look, certain promotions like Dragon Gate has always had this philosophy, and they do right now. Shun Skywalker holds their biggest title, and I think he's only like 22 or 23. And look, the idea is that like, look, if he's good enough, we're just going to push you in the main event. Like, why wait to build him up for years and years and years? So, like, he's losing years of his prime when we feel like he's good enough to be a champion right now. And they've always been like that. They've got, a couple other rookies, SB Kento. I think it's La Estrella, I think is the other one. And there's also Hip Hop Koto. I'm just doing it off the top of my head. Some Dragon Gate people are going to get mad at me for not knowing all those people off the top of my head. But they're all people who were like between, I think, like 19 and 23 years old, and they're getting big pushes, or established pushes. And I think that's interesting. But we're kind of getting off topic here. We're going to wrap things up here. Jason, you got anything else you want to say about women's wrestling that we haven't gotten to?
No, I mean just final thoughts on the Joshi scene, like just even the other promotions as well. There's all the other great young talents, of course. Venny, she just won the I think it's called the Beyond the Sea Championship. That's the top title in seed lining, and so obviously she's a freelance. That's just what the title's called. And so
I know
she's obviously.
It's very Joshi that the promotion has a weird name and the titles all have weird names.
Yeah, and so like obviously she's a freelancer. She's in line for a big push, and I think a lot of people on Twitter, at least, from my scene, they're really enjoying her, and so that's really awesome to see. Tokyo Joshi Pro, of course, they have a ton of young talent as well, so it's a really exciting time. Marvelous has great young talent as well, so it's a really exciting time for Joshi, and really bright to see the futures of these potential stars.
Should we talk about Maki Ito real quick, because she's suddenly the most popular women's wrestler in the world?
Yeah, sure. I'm wearing her shirt right now, actually.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, no, I mean, she was someone who really kind of interesting. I actually hadn't heard of her before. She was announced for the AEW tournament, and her first thing was like, she just tweeted out like, "I'm coming for all of you motherfuckers," and I think Cody retweeted it, which is how I saw it, and I was like, "Who is this?" And then I watched one of her matches in Japan. I think it was actually against Thunder Rosa. And then she came over, and I think she's going to be one of those people who's really divisive about how people feel about her. I understand why people like her. I'm not like over the moon about Maki Ito matches, but there's clearly something there that, I can just see, she basically went from having no name value to anyone, unless you were like a really big Joshi fan, to being someone who was really talked about. And I'm sure she gained a bunch of Twitter followers, and I'm sure her account, I know her account recently got hacked, but she's back. Just kind of like an interesting development, seeing someone basically with only like charisma and a savvy social media game just like immediately feel like someone who is being discussed in American wrestling by just, doing very basic stuff. And it kind of, shows how small the world is, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's around our age. I think she was born like.
Yeah, I think she's 25.
Yeah, she's born in 95 like me, and so like she's our generation, so she understands social media, she understands that game, and obviously her English is good, where she can say motherfuckers and call people simps. That's where her fans are called.
I believe every Japanese pro wrestler can call people motherfuckers. I think that's what they teach you on the first day. I think that's what they teach you on the first day of you get into the dojo, and they're like, look, these are the English words you got to know. You got to know, like, some of them are wrestling terminology, and one of them is just fuckers.
Yeah, exactly. but like obviously that's charming for a lot of people. Her personality is in that way, or you're drawn to that. For anyone else, people would think, oh, that person's a prick. Why can't everyone a motherfucker? Like that's pretty rude. But for her, like it's a cool thing what she does in social media. And of course, yeah, like I get it. Like she's not the best worker in the world, but I think it's more a fault of AEW the way they booked her. I don't think they did a good job protecting her. At least in Tokyo Joshi Pro, like she's protected a lot more. Like she works with like before she went to AEW, she's in a tag team with Miyu Yamashita, who's like one of the best workers in Tokyo Joshi Pro, and so obviously she was protected in that way, where she could be the charisma part of the tag team, and the other person, Miyu, she's the worker part, and so that's a better way to protect her. And I think that should be a good way going forward for AEW if they plan on using her, which it seems like they are going to plan on using her in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, she's definitely an interesting talent. I hope that eventually with the pandemic, hopefully, being dying down a little bit, we'll be able to see just more international travel. I think, look, there's Joshi, like we said, when we talked about all that young talent, like there's a reason for that. It's because talent development is great, in a lot of these promotions. And that's a lot of talent that has potential to come over to the United States and make a big impact. And AEW is clearly very open with working with a lot of those promotions. If you could just look at the participants in the women's eliminator tournament, there's people who wrestled for Stardom, some people who wrestled for Tokyo Joshi Pro. I think there was someone who wrestled for Marvelous. There was just, it was a nice variety of promotions. It wasn't like they just all got like, oh yeah, we're just going to use some people from Stardom or whatever promotion they're working with. It's nice to see, and we'll probably see more and more of Joshi wrestlers coming over to the United States. Look, if this was a different world, if the pandemic wasn't around, Maki Ito would be working like 400 matches WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, but yeah.
She'd be she'd be everywhere. She'd be main eventing Joey Janela's Spring Break against Joey Janela. She'd be all over the place on every promotion. She would probably make more money in WrestleMania week off merchandise than she has in like the last 5 years of her life. Hopefully that will remain the case when international travel gets back on schedule and we can all resume our normal lives. But that's it. I thought that was, I think we had a good conversation today about women's wrestling. We're going to be back in 2 weeks again. One of the things we're targeting is just to kind of we want to wrap up the Wednesday Night Wars as they limp to the finish line here between NXT and WWE. Or just it's something we talked about last few weeks, but we're going to wait until it's officially confirmed. What we really need to do is wait on NXT to beat AEW on one of these weeks in the ratings, because as soon as they beat AEW, they're going to make the announcement, oh, we're moving to Tuesdays, to make it seem like they're not running away from them. But on that note, well, that'll be something we can talk about in 2 weeks when we talk about the end of the Wednesday Night Wars. I'm Jesse Collings. I'm with Jason Ounpraseuth. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.